it should be the Teddy generation.
I'm up for the Teddy generation. I think that sounds great.
You could do worse than the Teddy generation.
You really could.
Well, I think that's an excellent intro to what will be a very exciting episode about millennials in politics. So I hope you guys will all stay tuned for the rest of the episode. We have some really great guests coming up. Welcome back, everybody. This is Kelly. In this segment, I have with me Kristen Soltis Anderson, who is a Republican pollster and the author of The Selfie Vote, Where Millennials Are Leading America and How Republicans Can Keep Up. Hello, Kristen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. So Kristen is also the co-host of the Pollsters Podcast, which I love. It's one of my favorite podcasts as a data geek.
Oh, thank you.
And so when we talked about doing an episode on the politics of millennials, I immediately thought, I know a great millennial to talk to, and that's Kristen. So you are both a millennial yourself, but also a pollster who specializes in millennials and has written a book on this.
Yes, and I'm extremely excited that Pew Research Center about 2 weeks ago finally has declared the exact cutoffs for millennial. In terms of what year you're born in, what counts. I am at the older edge of the millennial generation. I was born in 1984. You know, for a long time, people just used the word millennial kind of as it was synonymous with young people. Mm-hmm. And so as I have just had my 34th birthday, you know, there's a point at which people stop going, maybe are you really a young person anymore? So having that definition of what a millennial is, where we start and we stop, has been wonderful because now I can say I am a verified, according to the Pew Research Center, member of this generation.
And I am not a millennial. According to Pew, I am Generation X.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Pew does not recognize the microgeneration Xennial, but that's exactly where I fall.
Yeah. There are plenty of millennials around my age who want to disavow a lot of the negative things they see about the generation and defect into the Xennial generation. So I understand, hence my congratulations.
So you just mentioned the sort of negative stereotypes about millennials, but I think many of them are not true, as you talk about some in your book. Could you talk about just sort of a very broad overview of what you see as the defining characteristics of millennials? And that's, of course, a very huge thing to talk about, an entire generation, and say, what unites them? What are a few of the salient issues there?
So you're completely right. You know, in the United States, we're talking about, I think the last count I saw was around 75 million people in the U.S. alone who are part of this generation. And one of the things that I think is important that I always like to point out at the beginning whenever I'm talking about millennials is that this is such a diverse generation. Almost half of millennials are not white, non-Hispanic. I always hesitate when I'm saying, okay, well, millennials feel X way. I'll get asked a lot. I mean, especially if I go speak on college campuses, well, you know, are you just talking about white millennials? You know, what about millennials from communities of color? And I always kind of say, no, I mean, inherently when I'm saying the word millennial, about half of whatever opinion I have just said, you know, that's being made up of by millennials from communities of color. If you just look at white millennials, they actually look in some ways a lot like baby boomers, at least in terms of political views, that part of what is driven the attitudes of our generation is the diversity. So I always like to have that kind of disclaimer up front. The other thing that defines millennials is that we are very tough on ourselves. So Pew put out a study about a year ago where they asked people, do you believe your generation is hardworking, responsible, self-reliant, caring? I mean, all of these positive traits. And millennials, we were the toughest on ourselves, only about a third giving their own generation, high marks on these characteristics. But that's not because we are not those things. It's because we've internalized a lot of the negativity about our generation, that we see the headlines that say like, oh, well, when millennials join the workplace, what that means is they're all going to be lazy and they're all going to want tons of time off and they're all going to want free snacks in the kitchen. And that's what it means. Not, oh, you have a workforce that will understand the ways that technology has changed how we've communicated with each other. Not, oh, we have a generation that has new ways of thinking about inclusivity and diversity. No. That's never the stuff that gets talked about. It's the, like, millennials really want organic snacks in the kitchen or they're going to leave their job after 3 months. And I mean, that's just the ridiculousness. And it's not borne out by most of the data or the experience that most millennials actually have.
One of the things that seems to keep coming up as I talk to millennials, we've talked to a couple of millennial candidates, and two things that keep coming up for them are student loan debt and healthcare. And that these are the two issues that they seem most consumed with because the cost of college keeps going up and up and up and up. And it seems to be the case in the workforce that to get any job, much less a good job, that the starting point is a college degree. And so they're starting off their adult life with this sort of huge burden of student loan debt and health insurance. We're at a precarious point in this country, I think, with health insurance. And so that is another thing that just sort of drives all of their decisions post-college about where to live, where to get a job, whether they can possibly think about buying a house or getting married. Are you seeing this as well as you talk to focus groups and do work around millennials?
So I do see student loan debt as a challenge, but I always caution political candidates who think that issue is the key to the millennial generation, that it is an issue that really affects a slice of the generation, but about half of millennials are not going to go get a college degree. So if you're talking more broadly about cost of college, then you're talking a bit more broadly. You're talking to folks who may want to pursue a degree, but feel like they don't have the means to do so. But there are a lot of people in every generation, including the millennial generation, for whom college is not something that they want to pursue. It's not something that they plan to pursue. And so I always encourage people not to think of that as like a defining issue for the generation, because it touches a slice of us, but not all of us. Healthcare is one, though, that I think has that broader, we all need healthcare. We all need jobs and a way to make ends meet and to try to find a way to make sure that if we get into an accident or we need that care, that we're going to be taken care of. And so that's something that I think is a bit more universal. And I think, when it comes to the way our generation views work and benefits and things, one thing that and I wrote about this in the Selfie Vote, that I think was a big missed opportunity for Republicans during the whole debate around the Affordable Care Act, is that if we're talking about any kind of policy that is going to decouple having a job and having health insurance, to the extent that it's making it easier for people to procure health insurance without needing to have their employer buy it for them, that should be something that we're championing. That for millennials, this outdated model of the idea that, you go work at one job and you stay there for a long time, and that's a very stable career path. And from there, your company is providing your health care and providing your pension and providing all of these things. And you're going to stay in that job for a while, and that's going to set you up for life. That for a lot of millennials, it doesn't feel like the model that we are growing up living under. And so if I'm going to change from job A to job B, do I also need to change my health insurance? Do I also need to change my doctor? That seems silly. Or, we're facing a job market that's still very challenging for people our age. If I can't get my health care through a job, is there an individual market that's going to take care of me? If I go through the exchanges, is that going to work? And I feel like that's just a missing piece of the conversation. So much when we talk about healthcare and millennials, we talk about can you stay on your parents' plan until you're 26 piece? But now, as we've seen from the definition of millennial, about half the generation, that doesn't apply to them anymore. We're older than 26. We've got to figure it out ourselves. We can't rely on mom and dad, even if we wanted to. And so I think when people talk about millennials and some of these issues, a trap I see politicians fall into is they think about millennials in terms of like the young people that may have interned in their office, who are disproportionately likely to be from upper middle class backgrounds, or middle to upper middle class backgrounds, or they're likely to have that 4-year degree. You know, people in politics kind of over-index for having graduate degrees and things, and that's not the experience of the typical millennial. And same thing with healthcare. You know, I think we think of policies that are, okay, when I'm talking to millennials, I should be talking about policies specifically aimed at young people, instead of thinking about policies that may not be aimed at young people, but what are the facets of this policy that specifically do affect millennials because of the ways that we are choosing to live our lives.
I think policy is the key word there. I was struck again and again reading your book. So your book was written before the 2016 election, but one thing reading it now that strikes you is the Republicans didn't listen to you.
You are correct.
and continue to not listen to you. So I think, and this may sort of get to what you're saying, that if we're thinking about appealing to the young vote, and a lot of people think about, I have to go on Twitter, I have to, do Facebook Live videos and stuff, and that's how you appeal to the young vote, but miss this policy piece, as you're saying. And it seems like in general, our politics is moving less and less toward discussing policy, and that there are a lot of policies. So I'm a Democrat, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but as I was reading your book, there were several things that I thought, oh yeah, that policy, I think that would be really intriguing, and I would love to see people debate that. And I might, in fact, agree with Republicans on this particular thing. So maybe something about deregulation, or, like you're talking about decoupling health insurance from employment. But that doesn't seem to be the way the Republican Party is moving in general.
No, so it's depressing times to be a Selfie Vote Republican a bit, in part because, so let's see, the book publishing timeline is kind of, it's odd because it just takes forever even after you finish writing a book. But I finished writing the Selfie Vote in December of 2014. We're on the eve of like the primary season kicking off, and the book came out in July, and Donald Trump had just announced his campaign for president about 2 weeks earlier. And the book doesn't mention Donald Trump once. When I filed the manuscript, as we were going through all of our various, edits and things, Donald Trump just wasn't a piece of the puzzle. And it was, okay, well, is the Selfie Vote going to be something that maybe, does Marco Rubio adopt pieces of this? Does Jeb Bush adopt pieces of this? As they're trying to fight for the admittedly small pool of millennials in the Republican primary electorate, is anybody going to take any of these ideas and run with them? And you did see, Marco Rubio pushing for some changes in student loans to make it more flexible, the types of loans that you could, or the type of borrowing situation you could find yourself in for folks that wanted to have something that's attached to, if you're not making any money, you don't have to pay anything back, these like new types of agreements. There were some candidates that took bits and pieces or had already advocated for bits and pieces before the book even came out. But Donald Trump in so many ways is kind of if you created a candidate in the lab to do the opposite of what I was telling Republicans to do, dig in hard on culture war stuff and really just, look, change brings winners and losers. When the world is changing culturally, technologically, economically, very quickly, there are going to be people that benefit from that, and there are going to be people that don't benefit from that. And my advice throughout the Selfie Vote is to say, hey, conservatives, the world is changing. You can try to stand athwart history yelling stop, or you can say some of these changes are inevitable and they're going to happen and we should lean into them and use them as the wind in our sails and figure out how can we use our worldview of what policy is good and use the wind of change with us rather than against it. And Donald Trump instead has said, no, all this change is happening for the folks that feel like they are losing out in demographic, economic, technological, cultural change. I'm going to say, no, I'm with you, and we're going to roll some of that change back because it's scary. And that's not what I'm advocating for at all. And I don't think that's where our generation is, even for young people in our generation who are conservatives like me. There are plenty of things that when change is happening, I look at and I go, are we sure this is a good thing? Let's make sure that we're not rushing into things. But that doesn't mean that I oppose change. And I think right now what concerns me is that the party is being so defined, not even by some of the, the types of policy debates that I bring up in the book, but by kind of a fear of the way the world has been changing and a desire to slow or stop or reverse some of those changes in a way that I just think there's no way you square that circle and you get millennials to say, oh yeah, I'm not crazy about technological, economic and cultural change. I don't like it either. And so I'm gravely concerned because, back when I started to pitch the idea of the selfie vote, it was